The Rounder Report, Season 1, Episode 2.
Indeed. Okay, welcome to the Randall Report, our second, hopefully much improved episode. Hopefully you got over the first one, Mel.
Wasn't too bad. First one went okay, second one
yes,
we'll have to wait and see.
We did make another attempt at the second one and it was bloody awful.
Disaster.
But then this is part of the learning process. So hopefully we've made some improvements, and of course the improvements will continue because we're going to be adding all sorts of little features in there. Of course you can contact us. We'll give you the contact points at the end. But the Twitter is Randall_, at Randall_report, and Instagram is _Randall_report.
Yeah.
Okay, so do raise any points to be discussed in future episodes. Ideas are always good, and comment, of course. And next time we'll be discussing Veganuary that has just about come to an end, the month of January, where there's a push to turn people to healthier options after eating all of that Christmas turkey and sprouts and blowing their way into the new year. Thanks for all the messages of support we've received. One from David in North London, very nice. Like two old blokes, he said, sitting down at the Cock and Hen over half a bit of shandy and a packet of pork scratchings. Not that I was ever one for pork scratching, but anyway, he said it was very relaxed and well put forward. Thank you, David. Anything particular caught your eye in the press this week before we kind of roll on to the main subject?
I mean, ultimately, what else has been going on apart from
Ukraine and Partygate, although that's kind of
tapered off a bit.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, yes. I mean, that's going to be our main topic. I thought we'd chat today about the issue, Ukraine, Russia, and what's happening with the 100,000 Russian troops that are on the border between Russia and Ukraine, and the threat of war being talked up daily, certainly by the US and Great Britain. And as a backdrop to that, since the end of the Soviet Union, as it were, NATO has, of course, expanded eastwards by adding 14 new countries to its group, including 3 of the Baltic nations, I think, and the states of the former Warsaw Pact, of course. All of these were part of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. And Russia sees this, of course, as a bit of a threatening encroachment towards its borders, and maintains the West has kind of broken its promises because they said that they wouldn't encroach upon Russian borders in that way during the beginning of the 1990s. Now, of course, the US and Great Britain are denying this. Then we're seeing the regular incursions of Chinese military into Taiwanese airspace, and all that brings. I think last week there was an incursion of about 39 planes, so there's for China, they see Taiwan as a sovereignty issue, and of course against the backdrop of what's happened in Hong Kong. More recently, this is started to kind of create a little bit of hubris that there's we're heading towards war. Now, do you think the likelihood of war, particularly perhaps with Russia and Ukraine, and of course involving the rest of us, is overblown, or what's your take on it, Mel?
Things have changed since we last tried to do our previous episodes, which didn't go quite to plan. But it looks as though definitely the Ukraine and Russia are definitely playing down war. They're saying that it's more a case of trying to agree original commitments that Russia feels that they haven't been doing. Obviously, going back to NATO, this goes even further back. This goes back to the end of the Cold War.
Yes.
So at the end of Gorbachev's reign, he said that the end of the Cold War, the end of the Soviet era, would have to have some elements in place to ensure Russian security. One of those would be that NATO wouldn't expand any further into Europe, because that would be seen essentially as an act of war.
Yes.
Because essentially it would be, massing of troops on the new Russian-European border.
Yeah.
And essentially they said, as long as you don't build up military units along the Russian border, we can maintain peace. Russia has enough to deal with, that they don't also want to be thinking of,
an arms race.
Yeah, an arms race and a Western Front, essentially.
But do you think that that promise seems to have been roundly broken?
Well, of course, because obviously we have NATO that have added 14 nations to its pact. We see missile systems across the Baltic area, in Germany and in other Western European states, which you can argue was for European security, but I think it's clear to most people that have a knowledge of history that it looks very much like aggression.
Mm-hmm.
It looks as if the West are trying to build up weapon systems on the Russian border to ensure that Russia doesn't try to reclaim any of its ex-Soviet states.
So is that our paranoia then against the promised and breaking of the promise? Surely one kind of leads to the other. We've kind of rolled back on what was promised at the beginning of the 1990s. Putin has behaved in a certain way since.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about Crimea. So,
okay. What's your take on that?
The reason why, according to Russia at least, that they entered Crimea and took that territory, was because the majority of Crimeans were Russian-leaning anyway. There was a referenda 8 months before where the Crimean people voted 85% that they would rather join Russia.
Mm-hmm.
You can question the
validity of
the validity of that clearly, but on that mandate they said, okay, fine, we're going to go in, we're going to take Crimea, and then at least the Crimean people will feel that they have sovereignty again.
Yeah.
The other issue, just very quickly on that one, is that there was a build-up of US naval systems in the Crimean Sea. And so what Russia didn't want is for the US to have too strong a military unit so close to Russia, which is also why Russia took Crimea, so that they could then have military forces in Crimea and they could prevent any further Western expansion. So that's why Crimea has a very deep water port, and they were able to put Russian Navy along that port, and it gave an additional barrier between the East and the West.
Now we've had the West has maintained that the annexation of Crimea was an illegal act.
Totally illegal.
And you agree? You agree
No,
with that?
No,
you don't agree with that
agree.
premise, because I don't agree with that premise. I find it a little bit odd. And I know Crimea was actually given to Ukraine, or the governs to Ukraine under Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev, back in probably the 1950s, I would have thought. So I find this whole kind of language that the annexation of Crimea was just a wholly illegal act and a blatant attempt of pushing towards the idea of the premise of redefining the old Soviet borders again. I find it a bit spurious and a bit nonsensical. And I assume you're leaning on that side yourself.
I agree, but I mean, bear in mind, when Russia took over Crimea, they had made an agreement with the Ukraine, or originally what they wanted to do was they told the Ukraine that we're going to enter Crimea, we're going to make it a Russian state, but then what they agreed to is that they would pull out land, any sort of land military operations from Crimea, pull it back, but then they also wanted Donbass, which is the furthest western region of the Ukraine. Which
furthest eastern region, isn't it?
No, western of Ukraine.
West of
It's
Russia.
the furthest,
Yeah.
It's the furthest western region of the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right? So what Russia said is that what we want to do is, because Donbass is also, more Russian leaning, that they wanted to also take Donbass and create an independent Russian state, but with an army. Ukraine were completely opposed to this. They were like, okay, you've already taken Crimea, we'll cede that. So that's one thing. What we won't do is allow you to take another Ukrainian territory and then also put sort of military installations there. Because not only are you encroaching in our space, then you're also having a military presence, inside what we believe to be our own territory. So Russia took a bloody nose for that. They're like, okay, we got Crimea, which was part one of the plan, but part two was Donbass, which they weren't able to complete. So now, is this Russia action now? Will it lead to war? Because essentially they feel that they didn't get the full aspects of the pact that they had agreed, which included Donbass. So it's the idea to enter Ukraine, take Donbass, which is, let's say, more Russian leaning, and then complete the job? Or is the plan just to have a military build-up which is more of a mirror to what NATO and the West has done over the past 20 years? That's where it's a little bit muddy. We don't know whether Russians' ultimate aim is to claim Donbass and finish the job, or whether they are just amassing troops as a mirror to what the West is doing, just as a sort of counterbalance.
Gotcha. So you don't necessarily think then that it's mission creep, as they call it, of the Russians gradually encroaching on more and more space and pushing further and further to redraw what was agreed, say, under the Yalta Agreement, where the original Soviet borders were kind of defined. You don't think he's kind of edging towards that and seeing where he can push for it?
It's part two of the Minsk Agreement.
Right. Okay. Because the argument that we're using, or the West is using, is over that he's holding us all to ransom over the gas supply, and yet the evidence seems to be that there's been no reduction thus far of Russia's gas supply to the West.
And to what benefit? So if he switches off the gas supply, no income is coming in from the sale of gas.
Yep.
All of Europe, well, a significant part of Europe, including Germany, Italy, France and others, are hugely negatively affected as well. So it's sort of a zero-sum game on that side. So I don't
zero-sum for Russia.
Well, for everybody.
For everybody.
Because nobody gains.
Yeah.
Russia doesn't gain.
Because it loses money.
Gain. Yeah, Europe doesn't gain.
So do you think that premise, that thing that we're trying to argue, that the West is trying to argue, that putting the threat he's using of the gas supply, he's never acted upon thus far? I mean, I think there's been examples where he's threatened to cut particular individual countries off. I think Ukraine was one of them at one point because they hadn't paid their bill. But that's perhaps a wholly different argument. So why have we got ourselves into this situation where I noticed this morning and over the weekend that Boris Johnson has committed more troops, more equipment, and to Ukraine, and again is talking up the spectre of a more broader conflict. That's yet we're not seeing a single Russian troop actually particularly move in the direction that we're arguing that is only a day or two away, and each day or two that passes, nothing actually changes, and does that, of course, if that was his intention, hasn't he kind of spoilt any element of surprise?
Well, so that's the point. Is this tactics on the Western side, or is it the US and the UK being incredibly hawkish? Do they want to light the spark that causes an incursion?
This is the point. I mean,
and if that's the case, to what end? I mean, there has already been sanctions drawn up. Further sanctions on top of sanctions that
already exist, surely, yes.
Which
haven't obviously worked that well.
Which include the removal of SWIFT, so the ability to transact in foreign currency on the worldwide marketplace, which is what they did to Iran, and it destroyed Iran's economy.
Okay, so arguably sanctions can work.
It would decimate the Russian economy, at least short term. 6 months to a year, it would be incredibly bad news. This would only go towards pushing Russia to China, which I'm assuming this is already happening. Russia must know that these sanctions will incur should they move forward.
Okay.
And the question is, are they willing to take that risk in order to claim parts of Ukraine? So they might offset it. They might say it's worth us being sort of alienated from the West because you already have systems in place with other ex-Soviet states, with China and whoever else are prepared to deal with them outside of the sanctions. Mm-hmm. And they might say, on balance, it makes sense for us to take the sanctions, take part of the Ukraine that we wanted in the first place, and then we will become more leaning towards China. And therefore we create sort of a split in, so it's a weird word to use, but a new world order, whereby China is fastly becoming the most powerful country in the world. It will probably be the next superpower with all of the issues that it has. But if Russia then chooses to align itself with what will eventually be the most powerful country in the world, then it makes more sense for them to do that because they know that the US in Europe are on a decline. They're on a descent.
Well, surely then the whole obviously countries never want to back down, so they start this rhetoric and they don't want to seem as though they've backtracked. Surely the answer to this problem, because over recent years we've more and more isolated Putin on the world stage. We chucked him out of the G7. We've put sanctions on Russia because of arguably what happened with the Skripal, the Novichok, and Litvinenko. Although arguably, I'm sure that MI6, or British intelligence,
the CIA, and any other letters you choose to use,
any other as guilty of going abroad to other places and
Venezuela and Nicaragua,
bumping somebody off here and there. I'm sure we do it. We seem to deny that we do it, but I'm kind of sure that we probably do. It just seems that obviously where Russia's concerned, they don't seem very good at it without leaving a mighty big trail of polonium all the way back to Moscow. And likewise with the Novichok, ending up just killing some poor miscreant who just happened to pick up what she thought was a bottle of perfume out of a bin in a park. But
teach you not to do that again, eh?
If you're out there and you see a bottle of Chanel in the bin,
don't touch it.
Don't touch it with a barge pole. Easier, of course, if it's something like Brute, because you wouldn't use that for all the tea and char. Well, I wouldn't anyway. It's a personal choice. No offence to Brute users. But yeah, I mean, surely do you not think then that we've kind of gone a little bit too far in pushing him, cornering him, and what have you, that to our own detriment? Because we put the weapons in these countries that are close to the Russian borders over a period of years, missile systems and the like. We push him out of the G7 because of obviously some rather unfortunate behaviour on their part of trying to get rid of what they consider to be some undesirables, and we further and the sanctions, and we further push them away rather than being inclusive. Surely that's kind of counterproductive to the benefit of keeping a peaceful, peaceful world.
The West always needs an enemy.
I can't disagree with you there.
Because otherwise we don't have anything to progress to. So if we don't have an opposing force that we can overcome, the West doesn't seem able to progress and move forward.
Do you not
either
think
economically, technologically, politically, or otherwise?
Do you not think
we need to have a basis where we can try and overcome and improve? It's not the best way of doing it, don't get me wrong, but this seems to be the way that we do things.
I was about to say it seems to be a rather out of date pattern of behaviour.
Absolutely agree.
We don't seem to be learning any lessons from previous wars, notwithstanding obviously 2 world wars, where obviously in this clearly Adolf Hitler was a fucking menace. He had to go. Dodgy moustache and all, he had to go.
I mean, bear in mind, unless there's some sort of intelligence that none of us know about, feeding from Russia, that they're preparing something down the line that is, unacceptable, and that we are sort of moving forces in place to counteract maybe something that we are unaware of. Bear in mind, only, August, China announced their hypersonic missiles. They have a weapon system that can go into the outer edges of the atmosphere, circumnavigate the globe in 30 minutes, at Mach 12 or something ridiculous like that, and deliver nuclear payload.
But isn't that about defence?
Really?
Well, surely.
So China. So let me get this right. So China has a missile that can circumnavigate the world in half an hour and deliver payload at that speed.
Mm.
To most people's knowledge, we don't have anything to counteract that.
Which I'm sure is probably not the case.
Assuming it is the case, and they caught us off guard, and China has hypersonic missiles, which, by the way...
So, Western defence pants down moment, I'm afraid this is impossible.
Which, by the way, North Korea is testing hypersonic missiles, clearly, given support from China. Russia now has hypersonic weapon systems. The West has been quiet. We don't hear anything like that from France or Germany or the UK or the US.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do have these systems, it's very, very quiet. They've chosen, if they do have it, not to say anything to the world, which is fair enough. Because probably I would assume it would make more sense if you have such technologies. Probably best to keep it quiet because it's not in the interests of viewers.
So making a lot of noise about it. This is my point. Making a lot of noise about it, as China, clearly North Korea and Russia are, is to kind of say, look, fellas, behave yourselves.
Hold on, Simon. They already have these weapon systems available.
Yeah.
They're testing them now.
Yeah.
They'll be openly available within a year or two.
Well. Yeah.
So, in theory, if China wanted to, in half an hour, it could obliterate, the US and most of Europe if it really wanted to, and there's nothing we could do about it.
Well, that's my point, is why would they want to do that? Why would they consider doing that?
But is that offensive or defensive?
Well, to have it could be argued either
A
way.
catastrophic weapon that can kill us all.
Well, we've had this issue, of course, going back since the Second World War. Obviously, the only nuclear bomb that has ever been used was used by the USA on Japan.
Yeah.
And since that time, having them, arguably, and it is an argument to a debate to be had, has kept the peace.
Well, no, but only because it was mutually assured destruction.
Exactly.
But this isn't the case with hypersonic weapons.
Yeah, but
because they're so advanced and they're able to operate at such speed that we wouldn't be able to retaliate.
yes, but the point is, if you need to drop a good few of them, and you need to target them, and at the end of the day, it's like how can I put it?
This is my point. We've gone beyond mutual assured destruction because these new weapon systems are at that next level.
Yes.
So that puts the West
At a arguably disadvantage if we haven't got them and we've just been staying quiet.
Correct.
But
so
to
for
what
the half,
end
so for the
would
half
it
an
benefit?
hour, for the half an hour that it would take to actually launch one missile system, and it would take another half an hour or so or more to reach one select position.
Yeah, but
China would have wiped most of us off the earth. So this is this is my point.
And then end up with a lot of land at the end of it, which would be bugger all used to anybody.
Well, no,
surely.
but things are different now.
Things are different.
Yeah.
Different in one way.
Nuclear weapon systems are different now. That you can actually target an area and it won't leave.
Right. So where would you?
It won't leave.
Permanent devastation. It wouldn't be as you're saying. It wouldn't
18 months and everything would dissipate.
So it wouldn't be as damaging necessarily as Hiroshima.
The nuclear weapon, the devastation, yes, but the after effects would be much less.
But that's
nuclear weapon systems of the 1970s and 80s are sort of 2 or 3 phases short of what they are now. We've advanced so far in the past 30 years that nuclear weapons of before are not what they are now. Which is why we have our own deterrent here in the UK, Trident.
You'll excuse me because I'm going to talk one of these bits of
so Trident, for example,
yes,
gets upgraded every 5 to 10 years because there's new technologies that come into place that improve the systems. So Trident of old isn't Trident of new. They're almost completely different.
But that's working on the premise that beyond the border disputes, say, whether it's Taiwan, whether we're talking about obviously Donbass and Ukraine, but the leaders of China and Russia would seek to do something quite as
it may just be
extreme.
It may just be a counterbalance.
Well,
for example, the US attacked Japan with these nuclear weapons
to end the war, arguably to end the war,
because they knew that Japan had nothing close to the same kind of weapon systems. So they said, "Okay, you know what? We have to use these weapons to end the war because we know that these 2 weapon systems will end the war. Japan will capitulate and that'll be that." We don't have that situation today, especially with the new weapons that Russia and China has. It's not a question that you can completely devastate a country and that'll be that. They'll be beaten into submission. Now China and Russia have the upper hand. So we're the ones that have to be more.
But we're assuming that China and Russia have malevolent and because our vision of China and Russia is often distorted by the feed that we get arguably propaganda of what is put in the news, and it's working into the sort of idea that China and Russia are malevolent forces, and yet arguably the malevolent forces over the last 20 or 30 years have clearly been the West. We've gone into countries that perhaps in a way that we didn't need to. I'm not sure. It's a big debate, but the removal of Saddam Hussein Libya is another
Gaddafi.
example, and Syria. Did we really need to do that? Was the outcome anywhere near worth, the horror of it all, worth doing what we did, all off the back of principally it was 9/11, of course.
If the result was destabilisation, then we did a great job. If that was
But
the
why
aim,
would we wish to destabilise countries where we could have actually, by being a bit more communicative with them, have at least developed a peaceable and workable relationship with them instead of, excuse me for saying it, bombing the fuck out of them and killing millions of people and causing refugee crisis that we haven't seen probably the size of since the Second World War? What is the damn point? And never mind the trillions of dollars and pounds
very
wasted.
simple. It's divergent ideology. We do not have the same. We do not have the same worldview. Let's keep it as clean as possible. We do not have the same worldview.
No, is that why the problem, I guess, have been...
So the West was unwilling to allow another worldview to essentially grow exponentially. And to gather force, to gather strength, to gather wealth, to grow as a community. That wasn't acceptable. For whatever reason, it wasn't acceptable.
Isn't that partly to do with the fact that the Americans, for a very long time, have pursued this notion of exceptionalism, which in itself is a form,
Evangelicalism also doesn't help.
The religious aspect, American religion.
Yeah, the religious aspect also doesn't assist things. When you make political choices based on a religious concept, you will always find yourself at odds with ulterior viewpoints.
And you think America's policy has been at least partially driven by
Judeo-Christian views don't line up with Muslim views.
With Islam.
Ultimately, you are looking at two completely different ways of life. Different.
But why can't they? I mean, why is it that we can't seem to coexist with these two very different points of view, with from a position of respect? Isn't it the case that when countries like the USA seek to change, or rather they think that by regime change they can have their version of democracy?
Yeah, because they install their own people, they install their own leader.
Yeah.
But essentially we are consciously incapable. We are not there yet.
Well,
as humanity, we are not there yet. We haven't found a way to exist together peacefully. It's human nature.
So do you not think then that if with all the talking up of what we're seeing by US and Great Britain, and the risk is ending up in, as we did with Iraq, as we did with Syria, as we did with Libya, it's the law of unintended consequences of ending up in something that it goes way beyond what we thought it might in the first place.
If we continue pushing the way we are, we're going to definitely get to a point where we've crossed a red line.
Yep.
In a way that we force Russia to react.
Yeah.
How many times have we seen this in war where the Gulf of Tonkin or, Pearl Harbor, all of these events which pushed us to the brink and beyond.
Yes, action and reaction.
Which forces another entity to react. They may not have wanted to, but they felt they were put in a position where they had no choice.
Do you think that some of that then is a hangover, if you like, from that kind of the way we behave, the reactions that we have to things, can go back to the lack of reaction that we had to Adolf Hitler, for example, prior to the Second World War, and we had Chamberlain in this country with his famous waving of the white paper, the appeasement, and at that point in 1938, clearly didn't seem to recognise the true intentions of Adolf Hitler, when the true intentions were actually probably quite clear. Are we not sort of painting that using that same palette, if you like, with the likes of Putin and China to assume that they want to take us all over, and therefore we need to do this, that, and the other? Isn't that the problem?
But do we want to act preemptively? Because we've seen what happens when we act preemptively.
Yes, bad news.
Bad news.
Bad news.
So far, nothing good has come.
It just seems to me that when you kind of work together and you've got globalisation and China has us as customers, we have hopefully China as customers. There's common sense to not knock seven bells of shit out of one.
That's ending though, isn't it? Globalisation is ending.
Arguably it is.
That has come from, the spread of COVID.
Yes.
Now, it's a whole nother discussion of how COVID, developed, where it started from, whether it was natural or not. That's a different discussion.
Well, it's a whole subject for another day.
However,
because I have my own thoughts on that, and I don't. I think the blame game is way off the mark.
But however, we've got to a situation now where most countries realise that we need to become more regional.
Yeah.
So globalisation looks like it's on its way out, and manufacturing, natural and raw resources are to be regionalised.
Yeah.
So we offset these major shocks, whether it comes from a pandemic or war.
More isolationist.
More isolationist.
Yes, and that historically has always led to more problems in terms of conflict. Well, anyway, a lot to think about. But certainly it does feel as though, we keep edging it. We're edging it towards yet another war, and perhaps with somebody or a country, particularly on this occasion, that would be punching well above our weight, arguably, and any idea that that's not the case is for the birds.
Another discussion, by the way, that I think we should be looking at soon is China and Taiwan.
Yes,
that should be another one.
Yeah, exactly. I know I touched that on that earlier, but it's a whole other ball game, and there's lots of arguments either way. Surely we can't be waving big sticks in the air when we've had our own issues with sovereignty over places, whether in the past that places arguably or rather other people would argue that we don't belong in. Whether it be Northern Ireland, whether it be Gibraltar, whether it be the Falklands, there's always historical arguments saying what the fuck are we doing there in the first place, and is it good enough argument because we've been there for X amount of time that we should still be there, and they all keys into the thing with Taiwan. It used to be part of China. It became sort of its independent entity, I think, from 1949. I might be wrong. Is that argument that they should remain an independent entity? Should it be part of China? This whole issue of borders. What's mine? Ownership. Big problem.
And it's definitely fluid.
Yeah. Anyway, I suppose I should wind it up, really. I want to hope that things don't get worse. But there's a little thought to it. Last Thursday, of course, was Holocaust Remembrance Day. Which I think we all need to remember for the fact that 6 million Jews who were murdered under Adolf Hitler's regime in Europe, and I'm in no doubt of the importance to keep that quite up there, as it were, to remind people lest they forget, lest to avoid it happening again in the future. And to remember this, and of course other genocides that have taken place both before and since. So my little thought for the day is just actually a little poem, I suppose, that kind of keys into the whole thing of what we've been talking about as well, and it's called Remembering Hiroshima. Muslim, Christian, Arab, Jew, there is no God that's just for you. Gaze above and be amazed, for all of us the sun has blazed. Put down your guns, do something right, before we end up in endless night. Or before we're lost, sorry, in endless night. I fucked that up, didn't I? But I think the sentiment is there. Until next time, have a good day.